Oh shit. Oh, Stevie G's. Jerry Joanne this morning.
Mr. Justicia, can you hear us? If you can you raise your hand? We have one call-in user that we don't have a name for. Your worship, would that happen to be you on the phone?
Could be Orest.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Katolik. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, it being after 12 p.m. so that I don't get a scolding from my vice chair, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the 5th meeting of the Community and Protective Services Committee. I will just open the meeting by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communications and supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact cpsc@london.ca. And I will first look to see committee members if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, then we will move to the agenda. We have 4 items on the consent agenda. I have not been made aware by any members of any items that they wish pulled. If you do wish something pulled, please let me indicate that. Otherwise, we'll move into discussion on the items on the consent agenda. Councillor Squire.
No, I'm fine. If we're going to go into discussion, I can do it that way.
Okay, so you're moving the consent items? Sorry, your audio is just a little choppy, Councillor Squire.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm happy to move it, and I just have one item I want to ask some questions about.
Okay, so the consent agenda has been moved. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Van Holst, thank you. And we'll start the discussion on this. And I've got Councillor Squire first, and then I've got Councillor Salee. So Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask some questions about 2.4. Are we going in order, or do you just want me to jump in?
We've got all 4 items on the floor, so you can speak to any one of those.
All right. So I just some preliminary comments about this. This is a great project, and it's long overdue in the City of London. And I really want to congratulate Indwell, who's been doing this kind of work in London and elsewhere with great success, largely with people with concurrent disabilities. And those are people who suffer from mental illness, drug addiction, other issues. And they're very good at this, and I'm glad we're getting involved with them. I also want to thank Tricar Developments, a developer in the city who made this land available to Indwell. They probably don't want any acknowledgement, but I want to give it to them because I think this is a really great example of us helping an established body do the good work that they do. That being said, my view generally is that if you find someone who knows what they're doing, give them money and let them do it the way they've done it in the past, because they know what they're doing. And I know this with Indwell. So it wasn't clear to me from the report is whether Indwell is still going to control the people that are admitted to their facility. And the reason I say that is they have huge expertise in the area of mental health, and that's largely what they have been doing. And I know through working and representing people with psychiatric issues, that Indwell is the place that doctors often look to place people from psychiatric facilities to their first residence. It works very well because of the supports. It wasn't clear to me from the report whether the city is now going to be becoming involved in that process. And my concern is if we start placing people or asking people to be placed at Indwell, that Indwell does not have the expertise or the ability to deal with, that it's not going to be as effective as it has been. So I wonder if someone could help me with that particular issue.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Ms. Daters-Beer, did you want to comment on that, or did you have a member of your team who wanted to comment on that?
Through the chair, I'll start, and then if there are other questions or comments, I'll have others jump in. To Councillor Squire's point, yes, Indwell is an expert, has expertise in supporting individuals in the community. In the development of this project, our staff and those at HTC have worked closely with Indwell to determine what would be available to the community. In addition to those who are involved in the Indwell programs, we also have a number of individuals in our community who are also looking for affordable, safe help. And so what we've been able to work through with Indwell is that approximately 1/2 of the units at this project would be filled through working between our homeless prevention and our housing access areas with Indwell. Indwell is supportive of that. And I think it's probably fair to say that Indwell recognizes that the supports that are needed for those individuals will fit within the service provision that they are prepared to provide as well.
Councillor Squire, did you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, because people are going to ask me this, because they're going to be very pleased with this development. I just want to understand if part of this development is going to be allocated to persons with needs, but not mental health needs. In other words, people who may have needs and challenges that aren't related to mental health issues.
Ms. Dadersbeer?
Certainly. Through the chair, I think it's probably fair to say that there will be a variety of needs of individuals being supported here. Some may have mental health issues, may have concurrent issues as well. Councillor Squire, I think to your question and through the chair, at this point in time, those people that are supported who are vulnerable in our community, a majority of them do have mental health issues. I can't sit here and say that all of them will have mental health issues, although I think they would be all impacted and would be vulnerable. So if you're looking for me to say that they would all have mental health issues, I couldn't say that unequivocally, but I think it's probably fair to say that in the combination of services between our service staff and that of Indwell, we will find a balance that meets the needs of those who are looking for housing, and it's also well supported by Indwell.
Councillor Squire, does that answer your question?
It answers my question, but my concerns remain. I think I understand the need for housing. I understand it very well. I have people, and I know one of the issues with London Middlesex community housing in the past has been people being placed there who aren't appropriate in terms of being able to handle a tenancy there. I also run into this, quite frankly, with Indwell myself, when people are placed there who I've represented, and they go to Indwell and they can't meet the criteria that Indwell has for them to be managed, and they're evicted, quite frankly. They're evicted, and they're evicted for reasons that are valid, and reasons such as drug use in the facility, having parties in the facility, disturbing other tenants. And I just want to make sure, because I'm not entirely satisfied with the answer, that Indwell is still going to have control over who goes to Indwell. And I really see that as opposed to a situation where the city says, look, we paid for X number of beds here. We're going to put people here who we want to be there. So you may not be able to answer that, but it's a concern.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Squire. I have Councillors Salee and Van Holst on my speakers list, and I know the Deputy Mayor Helmer raised his hand as well. So we will get to you, Deputy Mayor. I'm just going to go to the committee members first. Councillor Salee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for working on this with a quick turnaround. I had a question on 2.2, the agreement. Now, I recognize that's definitely great news for our city. Do we know kind of how long this kind of funding will last for us locally? And then my other question is, I recognize that right now we're using hotels, and I think in the report we talk about repurposing facilities and things of that nature. Would it be more prudent to just head into that direction to be able to get more space versus the hotels? As I'm assuming they're a little bit more expensive, and I'm not sure if you're able to talk about how much we're paying per room per night through the chair.
Ms. Dadersbeer.
Thank you through the chair. I'm going to ask Mr. Cooper to respond to the questions as it relates to our COVID response and those who are most vulnerable.
Thank you, and through the chair, yes. So I can give you an idea. We've with the hotels that we've signed agreements on, our rates average anywhere from $37.50 a night up to $63 a night. We've been very prudent on our negotiations with the hotels, and working with them to find an agreement that works both well within the city's budget as well as within the the proprietor's needs to maintain their hotel. So as for the question of how long the funds will last, that's a moving target, to be honest with you. We know where we're at for where funding would be for the end of June, the end of July, and the end of August. Obviously, hotels are pretty significant costs to us right now, in addition to staffing. Those are the two largest costs that we're seeing for the response that we're currently providing for COVID-19. And obviously, as we see this the pandemic last longer, the costs obviously would be maintained, and our available dollars would go down for any kind of response to come out of the COVID-19.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Councillor Salee, we can't see your smiling face, so I don't know if you have a follow-up to that or if that satisfies your question.
No, I do have a follow-up, and I guess, don't worry, I don't have a big beard growing, but my question was, my follow-up question was just if you could confirm how much per night, and then if we recognize that it is expensive, why haven't we moved to repurpose it longer than we anticipated, and maybe perhaps using the funds that we have now to repurpose some, whether it's recreation centers or things like that, to be able to make them suitable for longer term use, if the hotels are going to be a little bit more difficult for us to. I mean, I am happy that we're able to utilize the hotels to help create that economic drive, but at the same time, we only have so much money.
Thank you, Councillor Salee. Your audio broke up a little bit while you were asking your question there, so I'm just going to, I think, summarize it for Mr. Cooper and see if he can provide a response. In terms of the funding, Mr. Cooper, I think Councillor Salee is asking, has any consideration been given to repurposing city-owned facilities to reduce the cost in the longer term if longer term solutions are needed, or middle term perhaps is maybe a better way to explain it. Councillor Salee, is that accurate summary of your question?
Correct, and just to confirm how much it is per night for the hotel room on average, and then to reiterate, what haven't we just kind of headed in that direction now, since it's obviously going to be more cheaper, I'm assuming, to host these residents at some of our facilities.
Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, and through the chair, I can answer the per night cost. It's a bit of a range. If we're looking for an exact average, it is in around the $50, $53 per night average is what we're paying for each hotel room. That's significantly lower than other communities. I know, some areas in Windsor and Hamilton and that are paying well over $100 a night. So kudos to my staff that negotiated those rates at that considerably reduced rate, and something that we were able to find that worked for both the hotel and the city in our current situation. As for the rec center, I'd have to turn that over to Ms. Daters-Beer to answer.
Through the chair, I appreciate the suggestion with respect to the use of city spaces at this point in time, and in order to ensure the best possible distancing for individuals who might be COVID susceptible or COVID positive, we've taken the position of access to hotel rooms, and that's both from a standpoint of keeping individuals who are being supported safe, while concurrently trying to support as best as possible the staff and keeping them from getting COVID. I appreciate the suggestion around community space or using our own facilities. We've taken the position in the interest of trying to control the COVID and keeping as many people from getting the illness as we can.
Thank you, Ms. Daters-Beer. Mr. Councillor Salee, any further questions?
No, that's it. But I'll just wrap up by saying I recognize that we want to make sure that people aren't exposing each other to potential the potential virus, but I do see that there's definitely opportunity, as I've seen in maybe other communities, where we can repurpose our facilities to make sure it meets the standards and people can be protected, as that might be something more sustainable as we continue to head in this direction. But I'll leave my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Salee. Councillor Van Holst. Councillor Van Holst, you'll have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Okay, thank you. I had a question about number 2.4 as well. I must say I'm also very pleased about this. As I drove down Dundas Street, it was like OEV was missing a tooth, and I'm glad that we're able to fix that and provide some bridge financing, which was my question. We were providing a forgivable loan of $4 million, and if it had said we were providing a grant, I would understand it, but I guess I would like some clarification on how the forgivable loan works.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. Ms. Datersbeer?
Through the chair, I'm going to ask Mr. Justicia from the Housing Development Corporation to speak to the financing on this project.
Through the chair, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So the financing on this project, when we talk about a forgivable loan, technically we are talking about what is like a grant. The money is not anticipated to be repaid, but it does stay on title as a loan for the full duration, in this case of the 50-year agreement. And the reason why it stays on title like that is because then the program requirements that are associated with it are then attached to the loan. And basically what you have is you have an amount of money that has been contributed that is on an annual basis, the interest on that amount is forgiven. And then at the end of the period, the principal on the amount is forgiven. So to answer your question, when we say forgivable loan, we're speaking of what is like a grant, only with provisions that hold it on title.
Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you very much. That was the clarification that I was looking for. My next question is about the hotel rooms. How many of those are being used, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair?
And we'll look to Mr. Cooper for some information on how many hotel rooms are being used.
Yes, thank you. And through the chair, I can advise that at this stage, we're at 194 motel rooms. We have 115 that we used to create physical distancing within shelters and really allow our shelters to continue operating with the challenges that they've been experiencing with COVID. We've had 26 rooms identified for isolation spaces. So individual that's experiencing homelessness that may test or probable or test positive for COVID-19 has a space to isolate. We've also had monitoring spaces, which is up to 30 rooms. We currently are renting 6. And those spaces are for individuals that may be asymptomatic of COVID, but are being medically directed to self-isolate. So those are those spaces. We have 9 spaces that we provided to Atlosa as part of the resting space program. Their current location deemed after about a month not able to maintain physical distancing, and therefore they've transitioned into a motel to be able to still maintain their resting space program. And then we've heard from the VAW sector that there's been some challenges with capacity. We work quite closely with the various support agencies and shelters through the VAW program to provide an additional 14 rooms to support some additional capacity for women fleeing violence.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you for that. Maybe I could rephrase my question. How many of the rooms that we've rented are unoccupied? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. Mr. Cooper, do we have rooms rented that are currently unoccupied?
Thank you. And through the chair, for our monitoring space and our isolation spaces, right now our monitoring space, we have up to 30 rooms. So we do have access to an additional 25 rooms that we're not paying for, but are what we would consider being vacant because they are kind of being held for us right now. For our isolation spaces, we would have about 22 rooms vacant right now as we're waiting for the testing to be completed, and we're waiting for individuals that are going through our process with the Intercommunity Health to present. When we were initially setting up these motels, it was very challenging to find a location to have somebody to isolate or allow people to isolate. So it did necessitate us to rent the entire motel in this one location. So we are, you know, have some vacancies there, but we are able to be responsive to any needs in the community for people that have to self-isolate, that have nowhere to go. A lot of times we're seeing people experiencing homelessness of doing that, or people at risk of becoming homeless if they cannot self-isolate. And so we do have some flexibility to be responsive to any future needs that do arise in community. As for our motels that created the physical spacing in shelter, I think we're at about 5, maybe 7 rooms that are vacant at the current time. I'd have to double check, but we're systematically working with our outreach teams, our coordinated informed response, and what we're seeing in community to make sure those rooms are, people are accessing shelter through the right shelter processes, and then being considered for those rooms if they're COVID vulnerable.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Councillor Van Holst, does that satisfy your question?
Okay, thank you. I do like the idea of renting an entire hotel. That seems to be a practical thing for isolations. Perhaps at the council meeting, I might ask the same question and just hope for an answer that says, this is how many hotel rooms we have available, and this is how many rooms are unoccupied, just as 2 single numbers. Okay, I think that's my questions for right now. Although I do agree with Councillor Salee at the cost of these things. My thoughts are drawn again to the cost effectiveness of Conestoga huts. I wonder, boy, if we had some of those, they do a great job at isolating people. But that's water under the bridge. Mr. Chair, I'll turn the mic back to my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. And we do have a fairly substantive speakers list. So I still have Councillor Hillier from the committee, and then I've got Deputy Mayor Helmer, Councillor Pelosa, and Mayor Holder waiting to speak as well. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you very much. All of my questions have been answered, and I do share concerns about the cost on this. I actually answered when Ms. Peters-Beer got on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hillier. Succinct. And Phil, I've got you on the list as well. So we will go to Deputy Mayor Helmer next.
Thank you. On 2.1, I wonder through the chair if Ms. Peters-Beer, and I do want to recognize this, I think, is your last CPSC meeting. Thanks for all the work you've done to get us to the point we are at in terms of housing. I know you're managing a lot of different things, and it has been a tremendous workload, especially with the pandemic on top. But in terms of the vacancy rate at London Middlesex Community Housing, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and where it's headed. In the report, it says at around 3.9%. I know the target is around 3%. And where do you see that going over the next few months?
Ms. Peters-Beer.
Thank you through the chair. I do think that the staff at LMCH are working very hard to address the issues of vacancy. They have reduced the number of vacancies down to a fairly reasonable amount. They're trying to get down to their target of 3%. They're at 3.9 right now, and they've actually been able to fill some units during this COVID period of time. Clearly, they are working on critical or essential services right now, so they're having some challenges in terms of fixing units, but they are doing the best they can while concurrently trying to keep both their tenants and their staff safe. They're committed to it. They have processes in place, and I think over the next period of time, they will easily hopefully reach their target and continue to maintain it moving forward.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I wanted to say on 2.3, first of all, thank you to the province for the additional funding that they're providing as part of the pandemic response. That is certainly much appreciated, and also to the federal government on 2.2 and 2.3. One of the reasons we're able to do these things in terms of moving people into motels and incurring all these additional costs is because we have funding from the province and the federal government to make that kind of stuff happen, especially the Reaching Home funding, tremendously helpful. I wanted to ask about 2 things in terms of the response within homeless prevention. One is around the issue of showers. I know that's been raised in the community, people trying to get access to showers, people who are out living unsheltered. And I wonder if Mr. Cooper could provide an update on that. And then related to the rental of motel rooms, have we been running the kind of cost benefit analysis on perhaps acquiring one of these properties long-term rather than renting rooms?
Okay, so Mr. Cooper, can you respond to the question about the shower access?
Thank you, and through the chair, yes, we've been managing the shower challenges for a number of weeks, recognizing we hear it every day at the mayor's task force calls, and I'm happy to be able to provide. We're close to a solution. We found a willing partner to partner with us to be able to provide showers for individuals, and we're just working through what that staffing model will look like, and then operationalization of that space within the next number of days to a week. So we're really close to be able to have something. I don't have an exact date, but it's within the next, I would say, week to 10 days.
And in terms of potentially acquiring one of these motel properties long-term, Ms. Datersbeer, I don't know whether you want to field that or if you have another member of your team that you'd like to have field that, but I'll turn it over to you.
Through the chair, at the risk of realizing this is my last committee meeting, I could say yes, but I think it's probably fair to say that these are the things that we need to look at it from the city's perspective, recognizing we need to find the balance between what it might cost us to purchase one of these hotels versus the need in the community, and also looking at the broader municipal cost containment activities we may need to put in place as it relates to COVID. So I think it's probably fair to say we consider this, but we will need to take it a very close look at how we would do it.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
On 2.4, which is the Indwell project and the funding for that, I wanted to say, you know, the expectation in Old East Village, where this project will be built, is that this is the best possible building for people who need the supports to stay housed, and that it's extremely successful, and that it has the resources needed to be successful. So I certainly support the city contribution. I think this is an important part of helping people get into housing and stay into housing. I think Indwell has a good track record in other communities, and even in the downtown building that they're running, I think it's been going pretty well. The expectation in the community is that it continues to be run very well and it's properly resourced, and that people have the supports that they need to be successful in their housing. This is a pretty substantial build. It's larger than most of the projects that Indwell has run, with the exception of the one that's downtown. And so there is some apprehension in the community that, you know, this is a big one. This is a lot for them to be taking on, and everybody is sort of united in wanting to make sure that there's an appropriate amount of public and private funding going into the project, so that it is not just a well-designed building, but a building that operates very effectively and where tenants are thriving and living a great life, and not something where, you know, corners are cut and things that can't be paid for and things are not done very well. So, you know, so far the experience in other communities has been very good with Indwell. I'm personally very optimistic about it, but I do think that making sure that there's an appropriate amount of funding is really critical, not just for the capital build, but the operations. Last thing I would say is this is a good example of multiple levels of government partnering with the nonprofit and private sector to make these kind of things happen. You look at the sources of financing, some's from CMHC, some's from donations, some is from the city. I think this is a great good example, and as well as the province through the HDC of all different levels trying to make a difference in terms of housing. So that's all I have to say about 2.4.
Thank you to Deputy Mayor Helmer, and I just want to acknowledge, I see that Councillor Cassidy is with us as well, and that she does have her hand raised, so I've added you to the speakers list, Councillor. But the next person on the speakers list is Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me at your committee. And just wanted to build on a couple comments and a couple questions in regards to what other colleagues have already raised in regards to item 2.2. Certainly, thank you to the Government of Canada for the 100% funding of this, of the just over 2.4 million. the numbers given by Mr. Cooper of the range of average of nights of hotel stay being around $53, and we seem to be ranging from 171 to 194 rooms. Thereby, we're spending 271,000 roughly a month to just over 300,000, which at that rate, if one's considering the housing costs of the hotel alone, of rooms alone, let alone staff support and other measures we need to give, that funding would run out this around November. If reports are correct that COVID would very well might come in 2 waves now and then again in the fall with the normal flu season and potentially be a lot worse, raising the concern of what's our long-term, medium-term plan with that, of how to make that money last. It seems like a lot, but I don't believe it is. So looking for a brief statement on that, and what supports are currently involved from city staff to our neighbors staying with us at the hotels, including meal support.
Ms. Datersbeer or Mr. Cooper, did you want to respond to that?
I can suggest Mr.
Thank-
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Yes, thank you. And through the chair, I can let you know sort of what our medium-term plan is, and it's really the implementation of the housing programs that council had approved earlier in April. So we're really focused on working with the agencies that were selected through that RFP process to get their programs up and running. We recognize that many of these agencies are also in the throes of the COVID-19 response and working with the most marginalized folks here in the City of London, but we are moving forward with getting those programs up and running so that we can get the people that are identified as experiencing homelessness and a priority in our community into the permanent housing conversation. So I would say that is going to be starting up within the next month and a half as we start meeting with the agencies to work on their ramp up programs and processes. We will be focusing on housing people and utilizing those programs to do that. We'll reevaluate as we go and course correct as necessary. We recognize that we're in a tight housing market. There are challenges obviously before COVID of our housing market, but with these programs we're able to support individuals. We're going to work towards housing. A lot of our housing first programs are still housing folks, not quite at the rate that we were, but we are seeing some successes out there, and we want to take advantage of those as much as we can, as well as work with individuals that are currently in the motels and living in shelter to get them to a point where we can house them appropriately.
Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify then, that part of this housing money is also considering how to support us going back into the fall, recognizing the program seems to be good for 12 months, but at the rate we're going, our money won't last that long.
Yes, ideally, sorry, through the chair, ideally what we'd be looking at is we've forecasted hotel use to the end of June, to the end of July, and to the end of August. Many of the agreements we've made with hotels are to the end of June. And once we get these housing programs up and running, we're expecting to sort of see where we can get with housing folks. And that is really where we're at. That is our medium-term plan, recognizing that once we start housing folks, we'll sort of reduce those hotel numbers as necessary. We're still seeing quite a push for individuals that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness and working through that with our coordinating form response team as well as our outreach teams, and trying to resolve some of the challenges that we're seeing around showers, around access to basic needs, but also long-term planning for housing. So there's some medium and long-term plans going on. I earmark a significant number of the funds or amount of the funds for when we come out of the COVID-19 response around first and last month's rent, around potential rental arrears, around potential utility arrears, and trying to get people housed. So that is the plan moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Mr. Cooper, that concludes my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Pelosa. Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, Chair. A couple of things. First, Ms. Datersbeer and Mr. Cooper and all your staff, what you've been doing and the work you've done with space availability has been amazing. And a shout out to all of you for your hard work. It really matters with our most vulnerable. I'd like to reinforce first the comments made earlier with respect to the federal and provincial supports that we're receiving. Those are critical. We're not stopping those asks, but it certainly moves us a huge distance in trying to get us to a place where we can find that we are able to accommodate as many as are needed to take care of. And I'm not sure, as I heard the comments, if I understand, I heard Ms. Dedersbeer say that obviously it's a much lower level in terms of those out on the streets. I know we have some difficulty with individuals who are on the streets, some that don't choose to come in for any number of reasons. But from a space standpoint, it looks like we're close. So I guess my first question to staff would be, do we anticipate that more shelter space will be needed, knowing that we're pretty much at capacity? And I'm ignoring for the moment the stabilization and monitoring spaces, just in terms of shelter spaces, please.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, and through the chair, creating the shelter space for the physical distancing has been the challenge. We have 307 spaces within our current shelter system, and with the motels, we've been able to marginally increase that up to about 310. What we've been also being able to utilize is more of the private rooms at the shelters currently, the Men's Mission and the Center of Hope. I think physically, utilizing the motel rooms in this case has been very helpful to create that extra physical distancing that's really difficult in a congregate living setting, because you're sharing washrooms, you're sharing eating areas, things like that. In the motels, we're able to share, they just have their own private space with a private washroom and meal delivery. So we've been able to create that additional capacity there to some degree. Adding more space in existing shelters, I don't see that as something that we're going to continue to do, but you know, managing the motel use and anything else that sort of comes available to us is something we will look at doing.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Your worship, anything further?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. It ties into the next point with respect to whether we might acquire some permanent space. We know in discussions with the federal government, with the minister and his parliamentary secretary, that there may well be some funds available to purchase a facility, be it a hotel, motel, or some structure. I'm not sure at this point if that would include renovations. I think that's up as a question, but it's one thing to acquire space, assuming that we are able to, that we have a mindset to proceed with it. It's another, though, that I'm concerned about is the ongoing costs associated with maintaining that space. I'm not talking about physical structure. I'm talking about the people with the skills necessary to deal with that. So two things. I appreciate a comment about if we were to acquire a space, what is there a sense what that kind of potential cost could be? And ultimately, Ms. Dedersbeer, since this is your last CAPS meeting, if you were a betting person, what do you think the likelihood would be then of the city acquiring a space, knowing that you don't have to live with any answer that you give us, but at the same time, and I say that a little tongue in cheek because you've been a phenomenal steward in your portfolio, but in terms of this, we're working towards a new normal now, and those who now have more private space than they've ever had will look at that and say, well, that's the way it should be. That's we're used to that. We like it. Some may not, but I would say to you that it probably compels us to consider that as an option, and I'd be grateful for your comments on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Dedersbeer.
Through the chair, thank you for the questions, Your Worship. I think it's probably fair to say that as a city, we have not been in the delivery of direct services. For homeless people, we've looked to our partners to provide that, and they've done good support in that regard. Clearly, our response to COVID is like none other that we've done in this community. Our priorities are still towards ensuring people are housed and permanently housed. Our Housing First model is where we would obviously try to stick. Having said that, I'm cautious in my response as it relates to the purchasing of any properties, recognizing that when we speak, it might encourage interest in the community and people to come forward and offer us places. And so at this point in time, we do need to look at, as Mr. Cooper has said, how we would change or move forward from that spot of where we are currently to moving people back into the community. I'm not going to suggest to you that we wouldn't look at purchasing something. I don't see us delivering the services, and maybe another community agency might help us with that. But I think personally, we need to be cautious moving forward so as to recognize that we have for years and tried to work with providers in our community for more permanent housing options, and that would be my recommendation of continuing to move that way.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you for
Datersbeer.
that.
Mayor Holder?
A final comment here. I've had the opportunity to visit the Indwell facility in Woodstock. I just want to come back to that. And it's one of several throughout the province, as I'm sure we all know. When I had that visit, we had staff with us at the time. I was exceptionally impressed with the quality of the facility and the care that was provided to the folks who were resident there. So I certainly support that. And as we go forward, I certainly am supportive going forward with the recommendations as suggested. That's all for me, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. And welcome to committee to our former chair from last year, Councillor Cassidy. You had a question for us. Councillor Cassidy?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. I was blabbering away here at home. Thanks for recognizing me, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Oh, perfect. So I just have a few comments. My questions have all been asked, and I just want to thank Councillor Pelosa and the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor for bringing up the topics of the long-term plan after COVID, after hopefully COVID, and we've moved on from it at some point in the future. But I just want to point out that especially when we see what's coming out of the province and the ideas for reopening society and how it will be a phased in reopening, I think that this physical distancing and a lot of the things that we have put in place where it's with regard to sheltering and homelessness and housing supports and all of that, those are going to be with us for quite some time. And I think the idea of physical distancing is probably something that should have been placed in temporary shelters for a long, long time. It's just that the illnesses and things that were present in shelters weren't of the same caliber and effect as COVID-19 is. So we were forced to make these very drastic changes, and I think the changes have been good ones. And like the Mayor, I share the wonder of what happens next, because we have people that have been allowed some physical space at shelters or having a much more private space in motels. And it has, I believe, brought a level of dignity that perhaps they weren't used to in the former situation. And that is not a criticism at all of our shelter system or the people working in our shelters. I know every single person from our staff to the outside agencies have been working their very hardest over many, many years when it came to sheltering people that were needing shelter. So this is not a criticism. It's just that many of the things that were put in place, from food banks to homeless shelters to many other supportive systems, were originally designed to be temporary systems. And what happens a lot of times when we have temporary systems is they become entrenched and they become permanent. So knowing that COVID will be with us until we have a vaccine, and we don't know when that will be, this need for physical distancing in our shelter system especially is going to be with us for a very long time. So not to get into any specifics about purchasing properties or anything like that, I do really hope that staff are knowing that they're under so much pressure dealing with the immediate. I also hope that they are looking to the future for what the long-term solutions will be, not just to COVID-19, but what the next virus is coming down the road, or the next emergency coming down the road. And we do have to do things differently. I'm so pleased that we passed the budget that we did with the supports for affordable housing and permanent housing and the Housing First model. And I do agree with staff and that is our true long-term solution. And I'm pleased to see the progress that has been made and continues to be made even during this this pandemic. And I do want to share the mayor's praise for city staff and the work that they have done in the midst of this struggle. And I really am going to miss Ms. Daters-Beer. I know she doesn't like to receive praise, especially not publicly, but you have done a phenomenal job, you and your staff. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Squire, we're back to you, sir.
So nice to see so many people who aren't on the committee coming to the committee today. I just want to echo, and the fact that Ms. Daters-Beer understands housing was really shown to me in the answer she gave to the entire motel concept. I think we have funded a lot of housing initiatives, and long term, bricks and mortar only makes sense if you have the supports within the bricks and mortar to help the people that are there. For instance, we've seen with London Middlesex Community Housing, when we put people in units who have issues with alcohol, mental health issues, just having the physical space does not solve the problem, and in fact can make the problem in many cases worse. So I think the idea, which I didn't see on the agenda, about purchasing a hotel-like property is an idea if it incorporates a lot of other elements of supportive housing that must be there. And by that I mean the people there, like they have in the Inwell model. So I think that what staff came to council with in terms of housing in the budget was fantastic. I think it was supported, the housing aspects, by every member of council. And I think they're on the right track. And I just want to make sure we don't get off of that track because of COVID, because many of the solutions we put into our housing plan are going to work with or without COVID. They are the way to go. And I don't necessarily see the motel aspect as being solution. So I want to thank Ms. Daters-Beer for the answer she gave to that question and the caution that she showed. And, you know, I've certainly had challenged Ms. Daters-Beer on some of her assumptions, but she's extremely knowledgeable and we are going to miss her. And really, I really want to congratulate her on the work she's done. That being said, I just have one question, which is one of the concerns I've had from caregivers, doctors, is if people are going into hotel rooms, one of the tendencies that people have who have concurrent disabilities is they often want to use their hotel rooms as a gathering place. They often want to have friends attend at their hotels. Frankly, they want to have activities in their hotel. So the social distancing, if it was left up to them, would be a challenge. So I'm really curious to be able to answer this question to people who are asking is, how are we working to maintain social distancing in hotel rooms? My experience right now is maintaining social distancing on transit. And it's a huge challenge to convince people that they should maintain social distancing on something that's supplied to them free because they use it, they want to use it. And I understand that. So can you help me with how we maintain social distancing in motel rooms?
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Ms. Daters-Beer, I'm not sure if you want to respond to that or if Mr. Cooper does, but I'll turn the mic over to you.
Through the chair, I'll ask Mr. Cooper to give you some sense about it for sure.
Thank you, and through the chair, you know, Councillor Squire raises a good point that we are currently seeing with our unsheltered folk and people are experiencing housing is their ability or lack thereof to physical distance. And so it was an issue that we had identified when we were setting up the motels, and the 24 shelter staffing that are in the motels helps that immensely. We do regular check-ins. There's check-ins with each individual 3, 4, 5 times per day. We work with the individuals that are in the motel around guest management practices, around guest management procedures, and as well as really working with them to understand why the motels are being used, what the purpose is, and the potential implications of having unnecessary guests in the motels and the potential spread of COVID. So our kudos to all of our staff that are working at the shelters, from Unity, from Mission Services, from Impact London, that are doing a great job at managing everybody that comes through the doors at the motels and limiting all the spread at COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Yeah,
Councillor Squire?
Yeah, that's great news. I know there was some uncertainty about that and it's really that I can go back and tell people that this work is done, and huge kudos again to those people who are doing that work. And again, it points out that bricks and mortar is not the answer to the problem. It's bricks and mortar with the necessary support. So thank you very much, Mr. Cooper, for the work you're doing in this area, and all of those people who are helping with that social distancing issue. I may want to contact them about riding our buses and maybe helping us in that area, because I know it's a huge challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Councillor Pelosa, you have your hand raised. Is that raised? No? Okay. Thank you for lowering that. Councillor Van Holst. Councillor Van Holst, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Question regarding keeping City Plaza open. I had a resident contact me and wonder why they were required to go to City Plaza to fill out some kind of application with respect to housing in light of the COVID. So I guess it was actually a proxy. Somebody said, why would this person have to go and risk catching COVID? Can't something else be worked out? So that's about all the information I've got. I'm sorry. So maybe I could put that to our staff through you, Mr. Chair, to see if there's
so
some kind of response.
Councillor Van Holst, I'm not sure that relates to items that are on the floor from the consent agenda. I think that might be something better directed through Ms. Datersbeer and her staff directly, and get that answer outside of the committee.
Okay, well, that's fine, Mr. Chair. I did read in our report that that location was kept open, and so people could come in. However, some people don't want to come in. So
I am just going to say that I think when we get into the minutiae of operations, as opposed to the general direction, we're not dealing with that at committee at this time. So I'm going to rule that that's not related to the consent item. Okay, seeing no other speakers, I'm going to take just a moment. Oh, Councillor Van Holst, did you have a second question? Your hand is raised still. No? Okay, thank you. I'm going to take just a moment to share just a couple of comments myself. First of all, with regard to the work that the staff has been doing, of course, everybody has said this, but sincere thanks and kudos from me as well. During this time, it's been very difficult. I appreciate colleagues' concerns about cost of these motel rooms, but I think that when we think about other properties the city owns, and when we talk about things like rec centers and that, you're not talking about spaces that are set up with individual rooms. You're not talking about spaces that have washroom and shower accessibility that a motel or a hotel room might have. So I appreciate the cost concerns, but I'm going to just share that I think the motel hotel route is the best way to go to provide the physical distancing, as well as the basic amenities. And Councillor Cassidy mentioned the dignity that this gives some folks, and I agree with that. It gives them that private space and that dignity. So I think that's the right way for us to go right now. And hopefully, if we have to contend with a second wave, and I know that both the mayor and the deputy mayor will be vocal advocates for the federal and the provincial government to provide a second wave of support as well. So I'll just wrap up my comments there. And since we have no other hands raised to speak, we will call to question on the consent items. Okay, and that is up. So I will do the roll call now. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire. Is that a yes, Councillor Squire? Sorry, we couldn't hear your video. We still can't hear you, Councillor Squire. Can you give us a thumbs up if that's a yes?
Sorry, that's totally my fault. I'm up on mute, which is probably a good idea. Yeah.
Yay, okay. And Councillor Hillier.
Yeah.
And Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I am a yes as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, we have no scheduled items. We have no items for direction. We've no deferred matters, and I've not been made aware of any additional business. However, I do want to take this opportunity, and others have mentioned it already, but as the chair, to express my sincere appreciation to Ms. Daters-Beer on her last Community and Protective Services Committee meeting with us. Certainly London's loss is Bruce County's gain, and we wish her all the very best as she moves on to her new role as CAO there. I have promised that once COVID-19 is over, I will come out and visit and lift a glass with her to celebrate her new role. But Ms. Daters-Beer, you have been, in my time in the chair of this committee, nothing but an incredibly compassionate and well-informed resource, not just for the committee members, but for Londoners as a whole. So I hope that committee members will join me. I know virtually it's a little difficult for them to do so, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I will give you an opportunity if there's anything that you want to say it, but I know that you're often a woman of few words, so that is up to you.
Through the, I've been muted. Through the chair, my colleagues here at the EOC have been muted, although sharing many helpful anecdotes over the last little while. I just want to thank them and to my team in Housing, Social Services, and Dearness Home. It has been indeed a pleasure to be a leader at the City of London, and I know that while I will miss the work here and the great work that continues to be done here, I have opportunities, as you've mentioned, in Bruce County to work there with the team, and I'm looking forward to it as well. So thank you very much for your kind words and for the support over the last 7 years.
Well, thank you, Ms. Daters-Beer, and I know I speak for everybody on the committee when we wish you all the best in your new role. So with nothing else on the agenda, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hillier.
I'll do.
Seconded by Councillor Squire. And we will do this by hand vote. All those in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.